you notice? So I thought it was quite lovely.
I'm paying more attention than you think.
Just a nice pick-me-up. I was like, oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
So the ones that I wrote, we split it up, were designed as a strategy I use with my students is to notice something that they're doing really well and then challenge them to the next level, to bring it up to the next level. So, excuse me, yours were sort of in that vein, the ones that I heard. Whereas if you're doing this so well, maybe you should try this, or some little to go up to the next level.
And my feedback is mainly just something small and positive to remind you of when you give positive feedback to an individual student, not just the whole class, but one at a time on a daily basis, how to make them feel. So it's about making the student feel better about the good things they do, even if they are one of those students that can push buttons, so to speak. Did we see the cartoon? Did everyone see the cartoon?
No. Oh, that's what you were going on.
I just wanted to comment on it because
How do I get back?
I just wanted to comment on it, and Marie and I were looking at maybe a video or something to get us speaking, and it says it's not that your son is bad, he just exceeds standards for mischief. So you can always put a positive spin on it, no matter what it is. You've already opened your feedback. We've talked about it, made you feel great, so we're off to a great start. The mindset of positive feedback. So when you're giving positive feedback, you have to think to yourself, what has the student done well, and how can it be improved? So that's exactly what Marie's feedback was. She focused on how you can further challenge yourselves. And when we get to student examples, I'll be sharing with you how I give student feedback and challenge my students to the next level. So what might your feedback look like in your classroom? This is some examples of things we talked about, a few things we picked up from the article you'll get when you leave that you can take back to your classroom and read and highlight and take notes on. Put them on private because you're so excited about that article, whatever you feel. We talked about first the feedback sandwich. So it's the compliment, the correction, and the compliment. Starting with positive, ending with positive. And this is something I picked up in college that doesn't matter what kind of feedback you're starting with or who you're giving it to, make it positive. So start off with positive, much like the feedback sandwich. Make it specific. So instead of saying you did good, say what they did good. Is it relevant? So the day's objectives, is it going along with what you're teaching for that day? Or is it something they know already from kindergarten? And relevant. That is relevant. Is it going along with what you're teaching? And Montgomery County doesn't have enough acronyms, so I'm creating my own. It's called PSRF, and I'm going to send it out to Dr. Starr, trademark Henry 2014. RF, you're going to see it in the curriculum very soon. I know you will.
I bet it won't be with your name.
I can tweet them right now.
So we have the timing of feedback, which is so important, and that it's as quick as possible, as immediate as possible. But then within the classroom, are you seeing a student individually to talk to them about how they're doing, or is it a sort of a classroom blanket statement? We talked about how in private with one student, you do have, the plus side of that is that the student can then ask questions about your feedback. You're not just writing something on a piece of paper. If you're meeting with them privately, they have the chance to ask questions about what do you mean by that? I thought I was doing that, and so you can really be very, very specific with them. In a classroom setting, sometimes it's easier to hear than it is, privately. So you say, like in my class, I was thinking, I've noticed that we're having a particularly hard time walking in the hallways quietly. And, what can we do as a class to improve our behavior in the hallway, or sort of have a group discussion, so that even though it's literally 2 or 3 kids who are causing all the disruption, we work on the solution as a group, and so they're not feeling like so isolated. Just that it's easier to accept those ideas. It's given as a group.
We brought some work samples, and before I share the work samples, does anyone have any thoughts or comments about feedback or anything we've said so far? Questions? It's a quiet crowd.
No, I like the reminder that we need to be really specific, because I know I tend to get kind of general. And I also like the reminder of making sure you kind of give one to every kid at some point. Because they do tend to kind of be towards the same kids. These are the kids that are really struggling. And we kind of can gloss over the kids that are either excelling or that are fine.
Did you say the most recent one? We were also talking about how students love so much to be noticed. And, we're also moms from the playground. Look at me, look, I can do this, look at me. And that's all you hear is, look at me, Mom, look. It's the same with our students, I think. They are just desperate for anything that you notice about them. If they have a new haircut, or they got their homework done all week. And you're like, I noticed that you got your homework done, and how much better prepared you are for class because of it. Just that you're aware of their efforts is just so important. As we all know that even as adults, if we're, working our tails off to do something and no one says one word about it, we're like, wow, that didn't go over as well as I thought, or, I did all this work and no one even noticed it. So I think that's probably the most important thing that I do with my students. Even in middle school, it was the same way when I taught at MB. It was just noticing little details. Or you look a little under the weather today. Is anything up? Everyone okay at home? Is there something in school? That just noticing your students. I saw a speaker years ago at one of the openings of the school year who talked about studying your students. And I'll never forget it, because I went home and I started listening to different radio stations and was able to then, like, oh yeah, I know that song. And I, sing a few bars with them in the hall or something, and it just pulls them in. So it's just, feedback is not just about academics, because unless you have them right with you and they know it, they know that you are right there with them and interested in them, that's when that's when they're open to more learning.
Just to tag along with what Melanie said about making sure she talks to, or she tries to talk to each student, it says right in the article, if you don't read it, only read the last line of the whole thing. It says, but there's no time to give feedback during the busy school day, especially to every student. It says right in here, I highlighted in the one I read, teach less. Teach less and give more feedback, because if you make the lesson smaller and then you direct each student's goal during that lesson and put spin on it and tell them what they're doing good, they can build in the next lesson. Whereas if you teach more and more and more and more, and there's not enough time to do the feedback, they might not know where their skill stands. And by the end of that class, you want them to know exactly where they stand with that day's objective. This is one student work sample I wanted to share. It was actually from yesterday, and all of second grade does problem solving once a week. And basically these two students collaborated, worked through, this is the second group problem that they worked on. And I let the students share their work, explain their thinking, their math thinking, and I let the students give them feedback before I give them feedback. So the one thing that the student pointed out, and I wrote it down, you did a good job remembering your label. And then we asked, did they actually label their answer? There's 24. And so the other student said, well, that's not good feedback because they didn't label their answer. And we talked about how their work was, they said, well, we would give them an I because they forgot their label. And they like to grade each other. They have a blast doing it. So we noted that maybe if this was actually graded, it would be an I. If they remembered their label, they would show proficiency. And then on the back, they were able to explain what they did. It says, we solved the problem by think addition and checked with a number line and ended with 24. So we talked about how, yes, that tells us what you did and how you solved it, but it doesn't tell us how. So they were able to tell me out loud, and that was part of my feedback for next time, to write this down, because they were able to tell me it, so I wrote it down for them. They said, I thought 4 plus 4 is equal to 8 in the ones place, and 2 plus 7, or 2 plus 5 is equal to 7 in the tens place. So then they said my answer was 24 cards. We said if they next time work on the explanation and label their answer, they're working towards their ES, and then they draw stars on their paper. Because they're in second grade and they love stars. It's good. So that's just one sample I brought along for this morning.
This other example is from Sylvia, excuse me, who and what she's done, which is, I guess, very similar to work to what you were just showing, Kate. There's a little experience going on here, better than I. She said, great models. I would love to see 2 equations. So, again, that's sort of the challenge into the next step, where they're first writing 55 minus question mark equals 21, to include then the equation with the unknown written in.
And usually the feedback we would give second grade is go back and put it in the equation, and that's how they double check their work, pick a different strategy. And my students will say to each other, if they see the work, I like how you use 2 strategies, because they can see right away if they wrote number line and they drew a picture. So that they always start, most of them, with something positive for their classmates, because it's a constant reminder. So it's not something that happens overnight in your classroom of students giving each other feedback. You give them feedback every day, but it's something you can teach. This session's over at 8:05.
The only other thing that I didn't mean to, no one was doing anything naughty, so I just take Melanie.
usually is.
So this is something I use in my work, and I borrow from. So if there's a student in the back who's just not on task, whatever it is that they're doing, they're doodling in their notebook instead of doing the math. I have the little stop sign that says, please stop what you're doing and make a better choice. So I can just walk by, and it's totally non-disruptive to the rest of the class. They don't really, unless you're sitting right next to the person that, no one even knows that they got that. And I just leave that on the desk and keep walking, keep talking. And it's amazing the effect it has. Like, whoa, boom, But I'm not embarrassed in front of the rest of the class. No one else knows that I was spoken to about my behavior. And so everything just can continue. So it doesn't stop my instruction. It doesn't, upset them to the point where they are unavailable for learning anymore because they're thinking about how they were spoken to in front of them.
Do you have a copy of that?
Works really well. I can send it out. I have these. I've had these forever because they're laminated and they just work really well. I've used these since middle school where they were super but in 5th grade they are as well. I don't know how effective they'd be in younger grades.
Yeah, but that one I like.
That
was
meeting
about
it. But they, I think it would be a lot of expensive to play with.
The hope is that they would correct the behavior right away.
Right away.
And then you can go back and just remove it, give them a quick look.
Yeah,
thumbs
yeah.
up, so it doesn't sit on the
That's the
shirt.
thing. Yeah, once, and then when you can remove it, it's like, yeah, you're doing what you,
Yeah.
I the expectations are the expectations. So, yeah, it works really well. I will send that to you. I guess that's it. You were a wonderful audience.
Thank you.
Do I keep my letter?
Yes, of
Yes,
course
you
you might
need
be
to.
letter.
If you want articles and
Yes.
feedback
In my spare time, I'll
outlined,
read them next summer.
and examples of feedback, pick them up on your way out.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
Yeah, we're giving door prizes.
Door prizes.
So, be sure to pick